Hi, welcome to a new episode of In My View. In this one, we talk about the current situation of floods in many parts of Western India, especially in the state of Maharashtra, and try focusing our attention more or less on the problems related to the governance of water and to larger issues which are related to governance in the context of these floods. So, as has been mostly evident all over the place, it's the southern districts of Maharashtra, especially the districts of Satara, Kolhapur, and Sangli, which were worst hit by the floods in 2019, the months of July as well as in August. In cases where you barely have 750 millimeters of rain falling in barely a couple of days, 10 days, 15 days between the last part of July to the 5th or 6th of August, you had almost 970 millimeters of rain coming in. So heavy incidence of rain, almost 60% more rains in regions which got flooded. Some of the worst rain falling in just the briefest period of time, raising all manner of issues and questions related to how did the flooding happen in the first place, what was the government's response to the situation on the ground, the compensation and the rebuilding of lives, livelihoods after the entire episode is a long process and would eventually continue. But one needs to make sense of this as one is making sense of it in the context of Kerala as well as in the context of Tamil Nadu. In the case of the recent flooding in these two states, as to how can things go wrong and where exactly is it that things went wrong and how can you exactly keep on building upon things. And it's in that case that one needs to unpack a whole range of issues which are related to government, governance, and so on and so forth. As far as this entire episode is concerned. And that's exactly what we plan to do. Water has been a critical part of structures of governance in South Asia since times immemorial. One does remember of Marx talking of hydrological empires as far as the East is concerned, wherein water was almost the key in terms of ensuring the longevity of dynasties and kingdoms, and in terms of ensuring control over the lives and livelihoods of people in pre-modern times. More or less the situation continues to be the same even in modern times. Maharashtra happens to be a unique state in the sense that it's endowed with water resources, it's endowed with adequate amount of rainfall which can make life possible and can enable life to flourish in this part of the Deccan. But nevertheless, it also has certain geographies which are scarred and marked by the fact that they lie in the rain shadow regions where it hardly rains and there's hardly water coming in for a long period of time. Maharashtra also enjoys the unique fame for being the state with the most hydroelectricity projects, with the most dams in the country. And despite the fact that it has the most dams in the country, it also has a much minimal amount of its land under irrigation. So assured irrigation, when one looks at it in the context of Maharashtra, is available to a very small portion of the land, especially when you compare it with other states of comparable growth and development. The recent flooding was unprecedented in the sense that this was certainly not anticipated, especially in the light of the amount of rain that has fallen. But what was more shocking was the way in which government almost evaporated on the ground in terms of the response, the first level of response, which should have had been given to it in the very first few days, the first very few hours, as the water started building up. This amount of rain, yes, it's anticipated, but close to the rainfall event, you do have a certain and you do have validated sort of documentation which is available from the meteorological department, from private players in meteorology of the variety of SkyMet and AccuWeather, who have been putting out weather forecast about the fact that it's going to rain heavily. And in the light of the fact that it's going to rain heavily, the sort of coordinated release of waters from reservoirs into river basins, which will enable the water to evacuate fast, thereby not creating situations of intense flooding, is almost a standard procedure which is operated, which is sort of put into operation in so many cases. Especially in the light of what happened in Kerala, in a slightly different sort of a geography, given the fact that it happened in the Ghats, and as far as the Kolhapur-Sangli flooding is concerned, it happened in the plain regions. But nevertheless, the lessons to be drawn are more or less the same. So, as far as the Kerala flooding is concerned, what was distinctly perceptible and noticeable is the movement of the waters from the reservoirs into the basins. The people in charge of operating these systems, for all sorts of reasons of laxity, for all sorts of reasons of what would happen tomorrow if it doesn't rain, sort of considerations, were found wanting in terms of letting the waters get released. So there's a certain amount of delay. It keeps on raining heavily. The reservoirs keep on getting filled up to their capacity and even beyond that. And the amount of water which is evacuated from the reservoirs into the basins, either there's no coordination in it, either there is no idea about the amount of the volume of water which needs to be released, either there's some problem in terms of operating the entire system. Basins happen to be complex because most of the time basin, and Maharashtra's case is much more clearer about it as compared to the Kerala case. Basins are shared between states, so they don't lie, but the entire rivers basin possibly doesn't lie within the geographical remit of a single state. And in the case where basins are shared between states, there needs to be a coordination as far as the movement of the water is concerned from the reservoir to the basins, not just in the case of one state, but possibly in the case of many states. So in this case, in the case of Kolhapur and Sangli, it needed a certain sort of coordination with Karnataka. Especially given the fact that the lower riparian happens to be Karnataka. So the movement of the waters from the Krishna basin on the Maharashtra side into the Karnataka side needed to be better coordinated with the Karnataka government. And despite the fact that you have this situation, that you have the same party in power at the level of the center, you have the same party in power in Maharashtra and same party in power in Karnataka, finds that there was complete lack of coordination. There was complete lack of certain sort of an understanding which would have had enabled the movement of the waters in a speedier manner. When it rains hard, especially in these days of climate change, what's very important and essential is how effectively and efficiently are the drainage systems working. So if the drainage systems are working effectively, if the drainage systems are working efficiently, one doesn't need to be worried about it as to what exactly is the amount of rain that is coming down. So it seems that the Maharashtra government's explanation about all of this, that this was an unprecedented act of climate change, wherein a huge amount of rain fell in a small period of time, and one was just caught unawares in terms of a response to all of this, just doesn't wash. These types of things should have had been anticipated. These types of things should have had been exactly worked on, given the fact that you have multiple agencies forecasting weather, putting out data in terms of the intensity of the rains, with which a government that has a hands-on approach to all of this should have had been in a better position to coordinate all of this as far as the drainage is concerned. Had the drainage been coordinated, possibly the situation of flooding that one did witness in Sangli and Kolhapur could easily have been avoided. But then that's exactly the problem that we have, that it just didn't happen. Two small observations which need to be placed on record as far as all of this is concerned. the early part of the monsoon, especially the one that started in the first part of July, witnessed massive amount of rains in the western parts of the state of Maharashtra, especially in and around Mumbai and its suburbs, in and around Thane. And one did have the usual sort of disruptions to life, to everyday life, that normally happen during hard monsoons in the Bombay metropolitan region. So you did have trains getting cancelled, you did have water clogging happening, you did have traffic crawling at a snail's pace, you did have all of that. But you also had a situation wherein the government of Maharashtra was almost present hands-on as far as the disaster response is concerned. One could see them working, one could also see the chief minister working, for that matter of fact. But when it comes to places like Sangli and Kolhapur, it seems at the end of the day, it leaves that bad taste in the mouth, that it seems that the Maharashtra government has double standards when it comes to dealing with situations of crisis in metropolitan regions of the state and the non-metropolitan regions of the state. So it seems that the metropolitan regions, given the fact that for all sorts of reasons that possibly we all know, they're well connected, they pay the largest amount of taxes, they have a more vocal civil society, they're the basis of political action and political parties. So it so happens that in their cases, they receive more attention, they receive personalized attention from the government. But when it comes to non-metropolitan regions like Kolhapur and Sangli, well, one can let them wash off many times over and one needn't bother its head about it. So is the present flooding a case wherein one can study the approach of a state government in a differential manner when it comes to regions in and around the metropolis and regions which are distinctly non-metropolitan? And in light of this, how exactly should one evaluate the functioning of local administration? How exactly should one make sense of it? And what are the provisions that need to be made about it in the future is also something that one needs to be really thinking about. On the other hand, was the sad spectacle of the Maharashtra Chief Minister campaigning for the forthcoming assembly elections in the eastern parts of the state, in places like Vidarbha, while the southern parts of the state, in places like Sangli and Kolhapur, were witnessing distress calls from farmers and from people in the countryside who were caught in a situation wherein they were just not able to make sense of what was going on around them. And there wasn't much in terms of help forthcoming. Pointed political speeches of the variety of "we have achieved in 5 what they haven't achieved in 70" seemed laughable in the context of villages getting marooned, cattle swept away, farmers in distress, people evacuated in large numbers, vast amount of crops getting destroyed, and a government whose response is tardy and shoddy, to sort of describe it at the best. So one just feel that this is a perfect sort of a situation when we need to be thinking about alternative systems of government. After the last session of a state legislative assembly, the duly elected government should be divested of responsibilities of day-to-day government, and day-to-day government should be entrusted to a new setup comprising of retired bureaucrats, judicial officials, police officials, who possibly won't have much by way of elections in the forthcoming election, and who possibly are more or less non-partisan, and whose sole responsibility would be the conduct of day-to-day affairs of administration and government. So this frees people like the Maharashtra Chief Minister from responsibilities of day-to-day government, and at the same time of busy, passionate, engaging election campaigning, which is equally important, which nobody is denying that it's not important, it's equally important. But nevertheless, one does feel that for politicians who are committed to election campaigns, day-to-day affairs of government and administration, of the variety of coordinating release of waters from reservoirs into basins, coordinating disaster relief, possibly is slightly too much. So they should be divested of it, and this should be invested in a completely different authority altogether. So they're freed up for purposes, their energies, their strategies, their ideas, intelligence is freed up for purposes of electioneering, and government is taken care of by people who don't have much by way of elections itself. So the minute you have an election, well, the government, the interim government can move on, and we can have a new elected authority. That said, the other bad spectacle that one did witness as far as this whole affair is concerned were relief packets being released in parts of the two districts of Sangli and Kolhapur, bearing images of ministers, the chief minister, local biggies as far as the ruling parties are concerned. And that sort of makes everything seem so weird, in the sense that one last saw this in the case of the Tamil Nadu floods in 2015, where after the Chennai flooding, the Jayalalitha government's response did entail relief packets being distributed in Chennai, which bore the image of the chief minister, which bore the image of ministers and local biggies and MLAs and all of that. And one can understand that in the Tamil Nadu case, where politics is more personalized, is more of the form of personality cults, is more in the form of cutouts and so on and so forth. So there is a certain sort of feudalization as far as this approach to government is concerned. But in a state like Maharashtra, especially in regions like Kolhapur of everything on earth, which prides itself on the fact that we have a more enlightened sense of what constitutes government. We have a more enlightened sense of a certain sort of progressivism and a certain sort of dynamism to the whole affair, in terms of the fact that these are parts of Maharashtra which believe, and for absolutely valid reasons, that they are more progressive, that they are more developed, more intellectual, more democratic, and more egalitarian. Democracy essentially is a system of government that has been adopted in India when the idea is the people are sovereign. The floods of the variety that one witnessed in southern Maharashtra were of a type which was unprecedented, wherein the whole problem that we had is it's the people who were in distress. So it's the sovereign that is in distress. Phenomenal was the crisis, and there's no denial about it. But at the same time, one needs to be very clear about this, that situations like this not just test the patience of the people who are caught up in situations like this, but also test the fiber of the systems and institutions of government that have been adopted, that have been bettered, and that have evolved in time. And in all of this, it seems that after almost 6 decades of independent existence as a separate state within the Indian Republic, the state possibly has gone back on a certain sort of compact that started evolving in the 19th century in terms of what does it mean to be Maharashtrian and what does it mean to be a modern Maharashtrian. Thank you.
Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update from the Unique Academy. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned.